Thank you very much for that, Helen. And just before we quickly move on to our next speaker, I want to make a quick appeal for solidarity, which links in with what Helen was saying. Many of us were inspired by the October student movement, which has taken place in South Africa. And that struggle, as many will know, has already won an initial victory in forcing the ANC government not to increase fees in 2016. But what is perhaps less well known is that on many campuses, workers have joined the students in protest. A key demand of the movement was an end to the outsourcing of university workers linked to the question of pay, terms and conditions. But that at the University of Johannesburg, police and security have been used to attack their own workers, and the university has obtained an order banning protests. And what's more, the university's management is refusing to negotiate with a democratically elected workers' committee, which is continuing the struggle. So our sister section in South Africa, the Workers' and Socialist Party, is appealing for letters to be sent to the Vice-Chancellor of the university, Iron Lester Rensburg, to protest against this outrageous treatment. And if you could please send them both to the university and to our sister section in South Africa. Okay, the next speaker I'd like to introduce is Chris Baugh. Chris is a Socialist Party member, and he is also the Assistant General Secretary of the PCS, a union whose members have been in the front line of the brutal Tory attacks. Recently, many of us have drawn inspiration from the fantastic victory of PCS members in the National Gallery. This is a strike that many of you will be familiar with, but perhaps what's a little less well known is the crucial role that Chris himself has played in assisting the National Gallery workers in this struggle, acting as the chief negotiator with management. With trade unions under attack from the Tories and PCS in the front line, we need more trade union leaders like Chris and his colleagues who are prepared to stand up for their members. So please give him a warm welcome tonight.
Chair, comrades, brothers and sisters, it's a great pleasure to accept the invitation to come and address the Socialism rally this year as a long-standing member of the Socialist Party, and before that, of militant. And it always bears constant repetition, I think, in these times, to remember the leadership and heroic role that militant played in Liverpool City Council. And it should equally be remembered, playing such a leadership role in the biggest and most successful mass campaign of civil disobedience seen in Britain for decades that defeated the hated poll tax and removed Thatcher from office. Now, waiting as we are for Osborne's comprehensive spending review, as we know, these struggles are not just a matter of historical record. These struggles hold important lessons for today. And one of the many reasons and examples for why I say that is that why else would we see a right-wing media in full throttle, arguably the most vicious anti-left propaganda I think I've seen for many, many years? Why else would they indulge in such a vicious campaign against socialists, where people who probably never read a line of Trotsky, know even less of what he contributed, bandy around words like trot and Trotskyists intended as some form of cheap abuse? Even Cameron in the House of Commons the other day, denouncing Andrew Fisher, who, interestingly enough, a revenge of the Blairites, been suspended from party membership, a former PCS officer, a good, decent guy, who's now been subjected to a campaign of personal vilification. And you even see people like, the John Cruddases of this world, apparently wandering around. He's a bit worried that the Labour Party might turn into a 1980s Trotskyist tribute band. Let me just say, prior to Jeremy Corbyn's election, I would suspect that might have been quite a good idea. But it's because of the struggles that we need to remember and we need to remind people of. It's because of those struggles and the support that they generated, it was that militant was targeted. And as we pointed out at the time, the outlawing of militant was about a concerted project to capture the Labour Party for the Blairites, to render it safe for capitalism, a project described by Thatcher herself as her greatest achievement. Now, as we know, Jeremy Corbyn, a stunning campaign and election victory. I mean, it warms the cockles of the heart after so much attacks on the left and the difficult period that socialists and the left have had to engage in over the course of the last few decades. But as we know, it taps into a deep mood beneath the surface of an anti-austerity mood. But most importantly, it reveals in such a wonderful, tangible way the massive potential for winning mass support for socialist ideas. And they attack Jeremy Corbyn in this virulent way. And they subject him to this vicious media campaign. And yes, attempting probably at some point, unless they're stopped, some sort of very British coup through the Parliamentary Labour Party. But it's because of a mortal fear, not just of the Blairites, but the ruling elites in Britain, that socialist ideas can and will win popular support. And of course, it's why my own union, PCS, has been targeted. If you look at our track record, a civil service public sector union, we organise in parts of the private sector, and I'm proud of the role, first and foremost, of our union fighting tenaciously at every step of the way to defend the paid jobs and conditions. And I'm proud of the role that we played in galvanising support for coordinated action and calling for concerted action against austerity. But I'm also proud of the role of our activists, the activist culture that we promoted in PCS, that is one in many respects. Leadership is important, decisive even, but without the bedrock, the network of activists and reps that we had in the union, we wouldn't have been able to sustain the things we have done. And that's not just me talking, that's understood by Francis Maude and the Tories, which is why they cut facility time, union time by 50% of all of our reps, why they produced one of the most incriminating anti-union documents you could ever read. It's on our union website, well worth a read, produced by senior civil servants in the department that exists for collecting tax, who, in this document, set out how to achieve the organisational degradation of PCS by targeting its elected senior officers and reducing the influence of PCS in the workforce, in the workplace. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, of course, the most decisive attack we've had to deal with is the threat to our finances, a deliberate attempt by the Tories and the state to choke off union finances. Now, let me just say, we were confronted with what you might describe as the mother of all recruitment exercises. To protect the financial position, to fund our activities and our fight back, we were confronted with the reality of having to recruit over 160,000 members in the space of 6 months. Well, I'm proud to say we've, at latest count, and it goes up, we've recruited over 145,000 members back. That is the best answer to Francis Maude and those that would seek to undermine PCS. Now, I don't want to overstate or understate the problem. You could argue weathered the worst of the storm, but we're still in it. There's still a lot of work to do. But I'm absolutely confident that that sends a powerful message of the support that our members have for the union and the support that our members will show and will need to show in the fight against the destructive 24, 25, 40% cuts in departments that that Osborne is now proposing. Now, we were targeted, of course, because a union stands in the way, because of our record. But again, we have to recognise we were also targeted because of our successes. The action that we see in the museums in Scotland and Wales, the action we've seen taken by members in Universal Credit, in DVLA, the action to stop privatisation in the land registry, the improved conditions we've won for some of the most exploited workers in call centres. And as has been referred to, the action, the historic strike of our members in the fight against privatisation of the National Gallery. Our members took over 100 days industrial action. 160,000 signatures were collected in support of it. We raised over £150,000 in donations from the wider public to top up the 50% strike pay of the members that were out on strike. Some marvellous and creative tactics deployed, not just in Trafalgar Square, but also within the gallery itself. This was a privatisation driven forward by Tory trustees, with the old director pushed aside. Now, I want to be absolutely honest that despite this magnificent campaign, we weren't able to stop the privatisation. Securitas took over that contract. But I want to point out that this was an example, and it shows in practice the powerful and important nuts and bolts job that trade unions can and should do. We secured the most solid protection on terms and conditions and recognition rights in any agreement that I've seen in recent years. And most notably, and I think most significantly, we secured the reinstatement of the sacked rep, Candy Unwin, despite all of the attempts by the employer to block that achievement. This isn't just a result for our members in the National Gallery who go back to work with a stronger union and far more confident. One of the many significant features of this is that this points the way to the concerted campaign we now need to organise across arts and culture in every museum and gallery against the decimation of arts and culture in the UK, now threatened as a result of the massive cuts by this Tory government. But we also know that trade unions in general are targeted. The trade union bill, in the words of academics who had a letter published, the most serious academics in industrial relations, had a letter published in the media a few weeks ago, and they described this: the government trade union bill is the most significant attack on trade union rights since the anti-combination laws of the early 19th century. We already operate under the most, to quote Blair, the most repressive anti-union laws in Western Europe, in breach of ILO conventions, where law lords are pointing out, where law lords are making in the recent judgment, actually said that the right to strike in the UK is little more than a slogan or a legal metaphor. Now, I just want to say that the unsung work of the unions, which you never see in the media, the big and small achievements, the fact that you work in a unionised workplace, you've got better pay, jobs and conditions, but at 6 million strong, it's the biggest voluntary working class organisation in Britain, and they attack us, not just because they look at the weakness of many of the union leaders, but they attack the trade unions because they fear its enormous latent strength, and that's a strength that PCS and every union serious about fighting not just union rights, but fighting austerity, needs to recognise. And we cannot allow the TUC, we put the maximum pressure on them, but if they stand in the way, the unions that are serious about a fight should come together and call the necessary action, not just against the anti-union laws, but a serious campaign of sustained industrial action against austerity. Now, let me just say, to sum up, comrades, let me just say, I think we've mentioned Corbyn's campaign. It shifts the whole frame of the debate, whatever we think about that. It puts socialist ideas back on the agenda, ideas that can explain not just the nature of the economic crisis, but also that the economic and environmental crisis come from the same source, a result of an economic system that puts profit above social need and now threatens the very existence on the planet. Now, I just want to say by way of summing up, with the Paris talks coming up, it's even more important that the trade union movement and socialists engage in the debate around climate change, where, to quote Sharmi Savant, who spoke at a big rally around the biggest climate march in New York of last year, where the richest 5 companies on the planet are fossil fuel companies, companies that have the massive resources to tackle climate change. But no amount of evidence, as Naomi Klein and Sharmi Savant have said, no amount of evidence or reason will talk the big fossil fuel companies and the corporations to stop them exploiting every last drop of oil under the ground. This is the reality of international capitalism, where market is God and everything is sacrificed on the altar of profit. It will not end its addiction to oil and fossil fuels, neither will it carry out the change as rapidly as needed, the coordinated democratic international planning that's needed to save the planet. And I would really just say, by way of conclusion, it is our role as part of the day-to-day fight to defend working class interests, to build a mass movement with working class interests at the heart of it. Without that, we will not be able to take the decisive action to protect the planet and build a just and sustainable socialist world with an ecological clock that is ticking, recognizing that capitalism will save its banks, but it won't save its planet. So let's commit to building up the strength of the British trade union movement, of building up a mass movement against austerity, of building support for socialist ideas, not just in the UK or in Europe, but internationally, and for socialist change and not climate change. Thanks for listening, comrades.